What if the most dangerous soldiers in Rome were not the young, hungry recruits marching for glory, but the men who had already fought every war, survived every battlefield, retired with honor, and then willingly came back because the empire called their name again? Imagine an army so feared that enemies didn't just fear their swords, they feared their experience, their silence, their patience, because these were not boys chasing medals. These were veterans who had already stared death in the face and decided it wasn't enough to stop them. In the heart of the Roman world, where power was everything and weakness meant extinction, there existed a hidden force of warriors known not for flashy armor or loud victories, but for their terrifying efficiency. The Evocati were not ordinary legionnaires. They were men who had completed their service, men who had earned the right to go home, to live peacefully, to grow old with their families. Yet when Rome needed them, they returned. And that choice alone made them different, because a man forced into war fights to survive, but a man who chooses war again fights with a different fire, a colder purpose, a sharper edge, and that edge cut through rebellions, invasions, and betrayals like a blade through silk. You have to understand something crucial about ancient Rome. It was not just a city, it was a machine, and every machine needs its most reliable parts. The Evocati were those parts, the gears that never broke, even after years of grinding battles. They were respected, feared, and sometimes even envied by younger soldiers because they didn't need to prove themselves anymore. Their scars already spoke louder than speeches. Their presence on the battlefield was like a storm cloud, rolling in slowly, silently, but everyone knew destruction was coming. And when generals looked across the lines and saw these veterans standing calmly while arrows rained and chaos screamed, they knew they had something priceless. Because courage is common, but controlled experience is rare, and Rome understood rarity better than anyone. These men were often personally invited back by powerful commanders, not ordered, invited, which meant honor, higher pay, and privileges most soldiers could only dream about. They could refuse orders others had to obey. They could demand respect others had to earn. And this created a strange but powerful hierarchy where wisdom outranked youth and survival outranked strength. Think about the psychological effect alone. An enemy facing a Roman legion might hope the soldiers were inexperienced or frightened, but seeing Evocati among them shattered that illusion instantly, because you cannot intimidate someone who has already lived through worse nightmares than you can create.
Their training did not stop after retirement either. Many continued practicing, sharpening skills, mentoring others, turning themselves into living weapons that aged like fine steel instead of rusting like abandoned blades. And this is where the true power of Rome reveals itself, not just in numbers or territories, but in the ability to recycle excellence, to bring back its finest warriors instead of discarding them, a strategy modern armies still try to copy centuries later. Every campaign they joined carried a different energy. Rebellions crushed faster, enemy morale broken sooner, discipline strengthened instantly. Because the Evocati didn't just fight, they stabilized chaos. They were the calm eye inside the hurricane of war, and that calm made them lethal. Imagine standing on a battlefield, hearing rumors that the veterans had returned, that the men who never lost their nerve were marching again. Fear spreads faster than fire in dry grass, and Rome used that fear like a weapon, sharper than any spear. These soldiers were not reckless heroes charging blindly. They were calculated predators, measuring every move, saving energy, striking at the perfect moment, turning battles into lessons and enemies into warnings. Their loyalty was not blind either. It was chosen, which made betrayal almost impossible, because a man who chooses loyalty values it more deeply than a man forced into it. And this voluntary devotion created bonds between commanders and Evocati that were stronger than contracts, stronger than threats, stronger even than gold. It was mutual respect forged in blood and survival. And when such men marched together, they didn't just represent Rome, they embodied its unbreakable will. The brilliance of this system also lay in morale. Younger soldiers fought harder knowing legends stood beside them. Veterans guided them without speeches, just through action, through posture, through the steady rhythm of experienced breathing before a charge. And slowly those young recruits transformed into future veterans themselves, creating a cycle of strength that fed itself, a self-renewing army where knowledge never truly died, where lessons were not forgotten but passed like torches through generations. And that is why Rome dominated not only through conquest but through continuity. Because while other empires relied on bursts of power, Rome built layers of resilience, and the Evocati were the living proof that survival is the ultimate badge of honor. Not medals, not titles, not applause. Survival and the willingness to return to danger again defined their legacy. And as wars expanded across continents, deserts, forests, and mountains, these veterans carried with them not just weapons, but memories of every terrain, every enemy tactic, every mistake ever made, turning experience into strategy, strategy into dominance, dominance into legend, and legends into fear. And fear, when mastered, becomes the most silent yet unstoppable weapon an empire can wield.
Now imagine the moment when the horns echoed across the valley and the ground trembled beneath thousands of synchronized footsteps. But among those marching boots were men who had already walked this road before, men who did not rush, did not panic, did not even raise their voices because they knew something the others didn't. Wars are not won by rage, they are won by control. And control was the true signature of the Evocati. Their armor might not always shine the brightest, their banners might not be the tallest, but their eyes carried a depth that unsettled even their own allies, because those eyes had seen cities burn and still chose to fight again. And that choice was the invisible shield that made them nearly impossible to break. Enemies often expected brute strength from Rome, loud clashes of metal and screaming charges, but what they rarely expected was the quiet precision of veterans stepping into position with surgical timing, cutting supply lines instead of just charging gates, ending battles before they truly began, and that efficiency saved countless Roman lives while crushing opposition with terrifying speed. The Evocati were often deployed where failure was not an option, where hesitation meant collapse, where one wrong move could erase months of campaigning. And yet time after time they delivered results, not because they were superhuman, but because they had already learned every painful lesson once and refused to repeat it again. This is the hidden truth behind their power. Experience is pain remembered and transformed into wisdom, and wisdom on a battlefield is deadlier than any blade. Their presence also changed leadership itself. Generals trusted them with critical missions, scouting dangerous territories, reinforcing weak flanks, guarding commanders, and sometimes acting as advisors whose single sentence carried more weight than a dozen shouted orders. Imagine a young officer standing before chaos and then seeing a veteran step forward calmly, offering a simple solution that prevents disaster. That moment alone could shift the entire course of a campaign, and this is why their value extended beyond combat into strategy, morale, and even diplomacy, because respect earned through survival transcends ranks and titles. There was also a psychological transformation within the men themselves. Retirement had shown them peace, family, normal life, and returning meant sacrificing comfort willingly, which forged an inner discipline stronger than fear. They no longer fought for glory or promotion, they fought for legacy, for the brothers beside them.
For the idea that Rome's strength was bigger than any single life, and that mindset created warriors who could stand firm while others faltered. Battles are not always lost when swords break, they are lost when minds break, and the Evocati rarely allowed their minds to fracture. Their stories spread across provinces, whispered by traitors, exaggerated by enemies, glorified by citizens, turning them into near mythical figures whose reputation often arrived before their armies did. And reputation alone could end conflicts before they began, because fear plants doubt. doubt weakens resolve, and weakened resolve collapses defenses without a single strike. Rome mastered this invisible warfare as skillfully as physical combat. The Evocati became symbols of continuity, proof that Rome did not discard its heroes, it honored them, called them back, elevated them, and in doing so encouraged future soldiers to fight harder, knowing their service would not be forgotten. This cycle built loyalty that money alone could never buy, and loyalty is the currency that sustains empires long after gold loses value. As years passed and conflicts evolved, their adaptability became another weapon. They adjusted tactics, studied new enemies, learned from defeats and refined victories, never clinging blindly to old methods because survival had already taught them that rigidity is the first step toward destruction. Flexibility is strength, and strength guided by experience becomes dominance. Even in moments of retreat, their discipline shone. Organized withdrawals saved armies that would otherwise be annihilated, turning potential disasters into future opportunities. And those who fought beside them often carried their teachings for the rest of their lives, spreading a culture of calculated courage rather than reckless heroics. And this cultural impact may have been their greatest contribution, shaping not just battles, but the very mindset of Roman warfare itself. When we look back now across centuries of dust and ruins, what remains is not just the memory of swords clashing, but the lesson embedded within their legacy. That true power is not endless youth or brute force, it is the ability to endure, to learn, to return stronger, to choose responsibility over comfort, and to stand firm when others seek escape. The Evocati remind us that the most formidable warriors are often those who have nothing left to prove, yet still step forward when called, because their motivation rises from purpose rather than pressure, and purpose is a fire that burns longer than ambition ever could. Their legend survives not because they were invincible, but because they were human and still overcame fear repeatedly, turning ordinary men into extraordinary forces through discipline, respect, and voluntary loyalty. And in the grand theater of history where countless armies marched and vanished, the echo of these veterans still lingers as a quiet but powerful truth. Empires rise with strength, but they endure with experience, and experience carried by willing hearts becomes the ultimate shield against time itself. And in the end, when the dust of countless campaigns settled and the cheers of victory faded into distant echoes, what truly remained was not just territory or trophies, but the invisible backbone of an empire built by men who understood that war was not glory, it was responsibility. The Evocati did not chase legends, yet legends chased them. They did not beg for recognition, yet recognition followed their footsteps like a shadow that refused to disappear. Because the world slowly realized a powerful truth. The strongest force is not the one that fights the most battles, but the one that learns from every battle and still stands willing when the next storm arrives. These veterans became living bridges between generations of soldiers, carrying forward techniques, discipline, and mindset that transformed raw recruits into resilient warriors. And that silent mentorship shaped Rome more deeply than any single victory ever could. Imagine a young legionnaire trembling before his first clash, then glancing beside him and seeing a scarred veteran calmly tightening his grip, breathing steady, eyes focused not on fear, but on timing. That single glance could erase panic and replace it with courage, and courage multiplied across thousands becomes an unstoppable wave. This was the hidden alchemy Rome mastered, turning experience into confidence and confidence into dominance. Yet beyond battlefields, their legacy whispered an even deeper lesson. They proved that stepping back into difficulty after tasting comfort is one of the rarest forms of strength, because it demands self-control, honor, and a purpose greater than personal peace. And this choice elevated them beyond ordinary soldiers into symbols of voluntary duty. Their presence reminded the empire that true loyalty is never forced. It is earned through respect and sustained through fairness. When commanders honored them with privileges and trust, they responded not with arrogance but with precision, proving that dignity and discipline can coexist without corruption. And that balance became a model for leadership itself. As centuries rolled forward and new armies rose across different lands, echoes of their philosophy resurfaced again and again. Elite units formed from veterans, advisory roles given to survivors, strategies shaped by those who had already endured the worst. Because history quietly teaches anyone willing to listen that experience is the only weapon sharpened by time instead of dulled by it. The Evocati were not immortal. Their armor rusted, their names faded from scrolls, their graves blended into the earth, yet their influence outlived marble statues and golden emblems, because influence carved into minds lasts longer than monuments carved into stone. And perhaps that is their greatest victory. Not the battles they won, but the mindset they left behind. A reminder that strength is not loud, it is steady. Not reckless, but calculated. Not temporary, but evolving. And when we step back and view the vast canvas of history, we see countless armies roaring like thunder only to vanish like smoke. But the quiet discipline of experienced warriors endures like mountains, unmoved by trends or time. And that endurance is what truly defines power. So the next time we think about empires and their rise or fall, the image should not only be grand armies clashing under blazing suns, it should also be the calm figure of a veteran choosing to stand again, knowing the risks, understanding the cost, yet stepping forward anyway. Because within that decision lies the purest form of courage, the courage to return, to guide, to protect, and to carry the weight of history without demanding applause. And that is why the story of these elite veterans does not end with their last battle. It continues in every era where wisdom is valued over noise, where discipline outlasts excitement, and where experience becomes the silent guardian of greatness, proving that while youth may ignite the fire of an empire, it is seasoned strength that keeps that fire burning long after the flames of glory fade into the horizon.